I'm delighted to mark 250 years since this church at Rathbarran, Killoran, County Sligo, was built by outlining some of the history of this church and of the Church of Ireland parish and community of Killoran and Kilvarnet. I'm a native of this parish, born in a railway cottage in Carrolochan, the Iron Cottage, now a ruin, raised in another railway cottage in Shanku. That cottage was demolished after we left it to live in what had been the station house in Liney, which also appears to be heading for ruin. I haven't actually lived in the parish since I went to boarding school in 1961. I researched and published a history of the parish of Killoran in 1985, but since then I've been researching and writing about the 1912-1923 period in County Sligo. So I'm not an expert on the history of the Church of Ireland in Killoran, Sligo or elsewhere. The Diocese of Achonry, to which the parish belongs, was first mentioned at the Synod of Kells in 1152, when Irish church organisation was being brought into line with practice elsewhere. The diocese was probably based on the territory of the O'Hara chieftains at the time. The parish of Killoran was established later, probably in the early 1400s. The ruins of the church in Killoran graveyard would suggest that it was the parish pre-Reformation church, which probably fell into disrepair after the Reformation, when the parish Protestant population was small or even non-existent. The Protestant dioceses of Killala and Achonry were united in 1622. It was said that they, quote, were each worth no more than £20 a year, and that there were such poor things as few will seek after them, unless it be some silly man who will content himself with a little without means to support it, and smallly attend the advancement of the gospel or reformation of the people, end quote. The Reformation coincided with the Tudor reconquest of Ireland and meant that the Reformed Church was generally identified with England and the English language. Most of the old Irish landlords were dispossessed during this Tudor reconquest and the Cromwellian wars and settlement which came later. In the 1650s, English and Scottish soldiers were rewarded with land in Sligo. One of these families, the Dodwells, owned land in the west of the parish, the townlands of Carnabonny and Carnaskey, until they were sold early in the 20th century. The Dodwells had been absentee landlords in this area, but around 1900, Malby Crofton Dodwell built Glenmore House in Carnabonny and lived there with his Swedish-born wife, Esther Maria. Esther Maria died aged 29 on the 12th of January 1910 after giving birth to her fourth child in the residence of cousins, the Crichtons at Carragary, Beltra. She's buried in the Rathbarran Church of Ireland cemetery. The child survived and was named after her mother. There is a plaque in Rathbarran Church to her memory and to that of her mother-in-law, Letitia Catherine Dodwell, who died in 1909, aged 83 in Dublin. She was Malby Crofton Dodwell's mother. Malby Crofton Dodwell established a company called Peat Products of Ireland and set up a factory at Carnabonny to produce a type of turf briquette. This wasn't a financial success, and the company was declared bankrupt in 1904. I remember speaking to a Dodwell lady, Elsa, daughter of the Esther Maria mentioned on this plaque, who recalled being driven in a carriage from their home in Carnabonny to this church for service. When Elsa Dodwell died in England in 1995, in accordance with her wishes, her remains were laid to rest in Beltra churchyard, beside those of her mother, who had died 85 years previously. The local pre-Norman landlords, the old Irish family of O'Hara, held on to most of their land, the only such family in the county to do so. The Landed Estates website says, through judicious choice in terms of politics and religion, they, the O'Haras, succeeded in maintaining their role in Sligo political and social life for 3 centuries. The other main benefactors of this church, the Percival family, succeeded to lands in Sligo in the mid-17th century, when George Percival married Mary Crofton, who was heiress to the Temple House estates. The Croftons had been granted land in Sligo in the 1600s. The O'Haras lived at Annamore and the Percivals at Temple House, both in the Killarney part of the parish, so Rathbarran was their parish church and the family burial plots are in the churchyard. There are also monuments to O'Haras and Percivals in the church. The Alexander Percival, who's remembered in this memorial, was an interesting character. He was the 3rd son of Colonel Alexander Percival, who was MP for County Sligo from 1831 to 1841, when growing financial difficulties forced him to resign his seat. This son, Alexander Percival, was his 3rd son, and he was related to founders of a Hong Kong trading house. He went out there, joined the firm, and eventually became a partner in 1853. He became a very wealthy man, and he was the first chairman of the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. There's a Percival Street on Hong Kong Island named after him. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, his father died in 1858, and his extravagance and the reduced rents during the famine forced the son and heir to sell the entire estate. Alexander Percival, apparently known affectionately as the Chinaman, returned to Ireland in 1860 and bought the estate back. As you can see, he died at Temple House in 1866, aged only 44. The significant increase in the Protestant population of Killoran Parish occurred in the second half of the 18th century. Charles O'Hara, who lived from 1705 to 1776, gave weavers and bleachers from the north of Ireland leases of farms around Killarney to establish the linen industry on his estate. Most, if not all, of these tenants were Protestant. He had a bleach mill and bleach green built near Killarney. In 1776, the famous traveller Arthur Young wrote that O'Hara had built houses for 80 linen workers on his estate. Dr Miriam Moffat, in her work on the Diocese of Killala and Conry, points out that the Church of Ireland population that developed in this area was unique in Ireland, in that it was composed mostly of small farmers. They were not as poor as their Roman Catholic counterparts, but they were not rich, and they were not as well off as many of their co-religionists elsewhere in the country. So they were far from the Irish Protestant ascendancy landed gentry stereotype. And, as I mentioned earlier, the Protestant landed gentry in most of the parish, the O'Haras, were also unique. It appears that Killoran Protestants had to worship at Collooney before this Rathbarran Church was built. In the early 1700s, Bishop Henry Downes of Killala and Conry, in a letter to O'Hara, calls the church at Collooney the mother church of the parishes of Killoran, Kilvarnet and Ballysadare. In 1766, the Protestant parishioners of Killoran petitioned O'Hara to build a parish church. Charles O'Hara agreed and granted land at Rathbarran. a lease was granted to church wardens Philip Percival and Thomas Armstrong and their successors forever. O'Hara stated in the lease that he was doing this for and in consideration of the promotion of religion and the service of God, and in consideration of his goodwill towards the inhabitants of the said parish. The church was built in 1770. It cost £921 to build, and there was a grant of £500 from the Board of First Fruits. This board had been established by Queen Anne in 1711 to build and improve Church of Ireland churches and glebe houses. The architect of the church is unknown. The first vicar of the new church was the Reverend Josiah Hearn, sometimes spelled H-E-R-N, H-E-R-O-N, H-E-R-N-E. He then got a grant of a glebe of 20 acres in 1773, and he had the glebe house built in or around 1811 at a cost of £924, which was more than the original church. Again, the money, or most of it, came from the Board of First Fruits, and the glebe house, which still exists, was and is an impressive building. Killoran and Kilvarnet were united by Act of Council in 1819. Kilvarnet, as I already said, had both O'Hara's Anamore and Percival's Temple House in it. The early 1800s saw frenetic church building activity by the Board of First Fruits, when their funds were very significantly increased by parliamentary grants. In County Sligo, churches were built at Cooper's Hill, Riverstown and Dromard in 1817, at Ballymote in 1818, Dromore West 1820, and St Crumnathy's Cathedral at Conry was built in 1822. In 1827, O'Hara had donated at least £100 towards the cost of building a new Catholic church at Rockfield. In the same year, an application was made to the Board of First Fruits for a loan to enlarge Rathbarran Church. The Board of First Fruits gave a loan of £400 for the work in 1828, and William King was the contractor. The architect was Cork-born Joseph Welland, who was the Board of First Fruits provincial architect for Tuam province. At this stage, Rathbarran Church was substantially enlarged and the transepts built, and it became more or less the church we see today. Archdeacon Verscoyle presented a font of Connemara marble. The National Inventory of Architectural Heritage website says, "There is something rather appealing about the design of this little church, which is unusual for having a basement crypt, semicircular chancel, and splayed corners between nave and transepts. The apse contains good stained glass windows which serve to enhance the overall design and lend artistic value." One stained glass window, presented by Charles O'Hara in 1876, is very special. It's the only window by the well-known glassmaker Lucien Leopold Lobin of Tours, France, in a Church of Ireland church. Lobin windows were installed in the Catholic Cathedral in Sligo town around 1873, 3 years previously, so presumably there's some connection. There's no figurative element in Rathbarran, in contrast to the Sligo Cathedral windows, which have biblical scenes in every window. Surely this is the influence of the then Rathbarran rector Hamilton Townsend, who was very low church, very anything which smacked of what he would call Romish tendencies. This window has beautiful ornamentation, has the name Lobin and Tours 1876. It has, at the base of each of the two lights, a beatitude for Matthew's Gospel. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Unusually, it has no reference to a donor. The Irish Ecclesiastical Gazette noted in February 1877 that a very beautiful stained glass window has been presented to the Church of Killoran by Charles W. O'Hara, Esquire, the squire of the parish. The east window, the Resurrection, is by Meyer of Munich and was presented in 1906 by Charles Keane O'Hara in memory of his father, Charles William, his mother, Anne Charlotte, and 4 of his children. This has the new O'Hara Cooper coat of arms granted to Charles William O'Hara, formerly Cooper, in 1860, when he inherited the O'Hara lands and took the O'Hara name. The lion rampant is from O'Hara's arms, the crescent from Cooper. The O'Hara motto, Virtute et Claritate, with or by virtue and clarity. The Cooper motto is above, Vincit amor patria, the love of country conquers. And an Irish motto, the O'Hara's, something like Loiv nor Saurus, possibly the hand that was never conquered. This window has the signature of Meyer and Company, Munich. It was dedicated by the bishop on the 21st of April, 1907. There's a plan in the representative church body library for repewing Rathbarran Church in May 1870. The contractor was Charles Kilgallen. This appears to be the implementation of the policy of replacing box pews, often owned by particular families, with benches in churches. In 1893, Charles O'Hara presented a new bell, cast by Murphys of Thomas Street, Dublin, to the church, possibly the current bell. Oak chancel chairs were presented in 1899 by O'Hara, and Mrs. Percival presented new lamps in that year also. Joseph Verscoyle Sr. succeeded Josiah Hearn in 1818 as vicar in Killoran Parish and served until he died in January 1862. He's buried in the churchyard. His uncle James Verscoyle was Bishop of Killala and Achonry from 1810 to 1836. Curates in the early years of the 19th century included Reverend John Stack, Reverend Robert Chambers, to whom there's a memorial in the church, Reverend Arthur Knox Hewson. The Diocese of Killala and Achonry was united with Tuam in the province of Armagh in 1833 as a result of the Church Temporalities Ireland Act, which saw a major reorganisation of the Church of Ireland.